chief. So let's have the debate right now. Senator Sanders, why are you the best prepared person on this stage to be commander-in-chief?
Yes, I think my record speaks to that, Wolf. In 2002, when the Congress was debating whether or not we go into a war in Iraq, invade Iraq, I got up on the floor of the House and I said that would be a disaster. It would lead to unprecedented levels of chaos in the region. And I not only voted against the war, I helped lead the effort against that war. Just last year, I helped, for the first time in the modern history of this country, pass a War Powers Act resolution working with a conservative Republican, Mike Lee of Utah, which said that the war in Yemen, led by Saudi Arabia, was unconstitutional because Congress had not authorized it. We got a majority vote in the Senate. We got a majority vote in the House. Unfortunately, Bush vetoed that, and that horrific war continues. I am able to work with Republicans. I am able to bring people together to try to create a world where we solve conflicts over the negotiating table, not through military efforts.
Vice President Biden, you talk a lot about your experience.
The difference on that particular vote, every single member of the House, including myself, voted for it. Only Barbara Lee voted against it. But what I understood from right away in terms of the war in Iraq, the difference here is that the war in Iraq turned out to be the worst foreign policy blunder in the modern history of this country. As Joe well knows, we lost 4,500 brave troops. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died. We have spent trillions of dollars on that endless war, money which should go into healthcare and education and infrastructure in this country. Joe and I listened to what Dick Cheney and George Bush and Rumsfeld had to say. I thought they were lying. I didn't believe them for a moment. I took to the floor. I did everything I could to prevent that war. Joe saw it differently.
Vice President Biden.
I was asked to bring 150.
In the wake of the Iran crisis, Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei has again called for all U.S. troops to be pulled out of the Middle East, something you've called for as well. Yet when American troops last left Iraq, ISIS emerged and spread terror across the Middle East and indeed around the world. How would you prevent that from happening again?
Okay, let me tell you, but before I tell you that, let me tell you something else. And that is, and I don't know if my colleagues here will agree with me or not, maybe they will. But what we have to face as a nation is that the two great foreign policy disasters of our lifetimes were the war in Vietnam and the war in Iraq. Both of those wars were based on lies. And right now, what I fear very much is we have a president who is lying again and could drag us into a war that is even worse than the war in Iraq. To answer your question, what we need to do is have an international coalition. We cannot keep acting unilaterally. As you know, the nuclear deal with Iran was worked on with a number of our allies. We have got to undo what Trump did, bring that coalition together, and make sure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon.
Vice President Biden.
I was part of that deal to get the nuclear agreement with Iran, bringing together the rest of the world, including some of the folks who aren't friendly to
that new deal. The USMCA, quote, makes some modest improvements, yet you're going to vote against it. Aren't modest improvements better than no improvements for the farmers and manufacturers who have been devastated here in Iowa?
The answer is we could do much better than a Trump-led trade deal. This deal, and I think the proponents of it acknowledge, will result in the continuation of the loss of hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs as a result of outsourcing. The heart and soul of our disaster trade agreements, and I'm the guy who voted against NAFTA and against permanent normal trade relations with China, is that we have forced American workers to compete against people in Mexico, in China, elsewhere, who earn starvation wages, $1 or $2 an hour. Second of all, every major environmental organization has said no to this new trade agreement. because it does not even have the phrase climate change in it. And given the fact that climate change is right now the greatest threat facing this planet, I will not vote for a trade agreement that does not incorporate very, very strong principles to significantly lower fossil fuel emissions in the world.
But Senator Sanders, to be clear, the AFL-CIO supports this deal. Are you unwilling to compromise?
The AFL-CIO does, the Machinists Union does not, and every environmental organization in this country, including the Sunrise Organization, who are supporting my candidacy, opposes it. So I happen to believe, and I hope we will talk about climate change in a moment, if we do not get our act together in terms of climate change, the planet that we're going to be leaving our kids and our children and our grandchildren will be increasingly unlivable and uninhabitable.
We're going to get to climate change, but I'd like to stay on trade. Senator Warren.
Sanders, you can respond.
Well, just to set the record straight, I defeated an incumbent Republican running for Congress.
When?
1990. That's how I won, beat a Republican congressman. Number two, of course, I don't think there's any debate up here.
Wasn't it 30 years ago?
I beat an incumbent Republican congressman.
And I said I was the only one who's beaten an incumbent Republican in 30 years.
Well, 30 years ago was 1990, as a matter of fact. But I don't know that that's the major issue of the day. I think what the major issue of the day is, does anybody in their right mind think that a woman cannot be elected president? That's enough. Nobody believes that. If Hillary Clinton got 3 million votes, more votes than Trump. So who believes that a woman can't win? Of course a woman can win. But the real question is, how do we beat Trump? And the only way we beat Trump is by a campaign of energy and excitement, and a campaign that has by far the largest voter turnout in the history of this country. And I believe that our campaign has the strongest grassroots movement. We have been endorsed by many grassroots organizations.
Senator Warren, I want to give you the final word. So I do think it's the right question. How do we beat out to Iowa Democratic voters for their most pressing questions? Edward from here in Des Moines writes, Des Moines is an insurance town. What happens to all the insurance industry, the health insurance industry here if there is Medicare for all? What happens to all the jobs and the livelihoods of the people that live in insurance towns like Des Moines?
We build into our Medicare for All program a transition fund of many, many billions of dollars that will provide for up to 5 years income and health care and job training for those people. But here is the issue. Tom Steyer made the point a moment ago. We are now spending twice as much per person on health care as do the people of any other country. That is insane. In some cases, 10 times more for prescription drugs. Why is that? Why is that? And the answer is the greed and corruption of the drug companies and the insurance companies. And if we want to do what every other major country on earth does and guarantee people health care is a human right, not a privilege, you know what we have to do? We are finally going to have to stand up to the health care industry and end hundreds of billions of dollars of waste and profiteering.
Mr. Steyer.
Let me pick up on this child care thing. Every psychologist in the world knows 0 through 4 are the most important years of human life, intellectually and emotionally. And yet our current child care system is an embarrassment. It is unaffordable. Child care workers are making wages lower than McDonald's workers. We need to fundamentally change priorities in America. We should not be one of the few countries that does not have universal, high-quality, affordable child care. We should not be one of the only major countries not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right. We should not be spending more than the 10 next countries on the military, hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies for the fossil fuel industry, tax breaks for billionaires, and then tell the moms and dads in this country we cannot have high-quality, affordable child care. That is wrong.
People that will be hurt by it, to help them with their energy bills and to bring jobs to areas that will lose jobs.
Senator Sanders.
Thank you. Let's be clear. If we as a nation do not transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, not by 2050, not by 2040, but unless we lead the world right now, not easy stuff, the planet we are leaving our kids will be uninhabitable and unhealthy. We are seeing Australia burning. We saw California burning. The drought here in Iowa is going to make it harder for farmers to produce the food that we need. This is, of course, a national crisis. I've introduced legislation to indicate it's a national crisis. We have got to take on the fossil fuel industry and all of their lies and tell them that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet. That's what the Green New Deal does. That's what my legislation does, and that is what we have to do.
Hundreds of voters say they are not enthusiastic about voting for a socialist. Doesn't that put your chances of beating Donald Trump at risk?
No, not at all. And that is because the campaign that we are going to run will expose the fraudulency of who Donald Trump is. Donald Trump is corrupt, he is a pathological liar, and he is a fraud. Now, when Trump talks about socialism, what he talks about is giving hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks and subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. Donald Trump is a businessman, received $800 million in tax breaks and subsidies to build luxury housing. My democratic socialism says health care is a human right. We're going to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We're going to make public colleges and universities tuition free. We're going to have a Green New Deal and create up to $20 million saving the planet for our children and our grandchildren. We are going to take on the greed and corruption of the pharmaceutical industry and the insurance company. That is what democratic socialism is about, and that will win this election.
Sanders.
It's been a good debate, but we haven't asked the major question. The major question is, how does it happen in the richest country in the history of the world that half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, trying to get by $9, $10 an hour? How does it happen that when the top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 92%, 500,000 people are sleeping out on the streets tonight? How does it happen in this great country? We are the only major nation not to guarantee health care to all. How does it happen that we have a child care system which is dysfunctional, a criminal justice system which is broken and racist, an immigration system that needs reform? This is the moment when we have got to think big, not small. This is the moment where we have got to have the courage to take on the 1%, take on the greed and corruption of the corporate elite, and create an economy and create a government that works for all of us, not just the 1%. Thank you.
Vice President Biden.
I wanted to point out Bernie talking about the wars. He said that Vietnam and Iraq were the worst foreign policy blunders in his lifetime. He talks about how in the Iraq War they were lied to by Cheney and Bush, Rumsfeld. That's something that a lot of other candidates won't flat out say, is that the Iraq War was a lie. They might say it was a mistake, but he used harsh language saying that it was a lie. And by the way, CNN promoted that. They played a part in convincing the American public that Iraq was necessary initially. He talked a lot about wealth and subsidies in America. He said if we are giving huge subsidies to fossil fuel industries and we have people like the Trumps that get these massive tax breaks, we should be able to pay for things like childcare, which will stimulate the economy, by the way. We should be able to have health care, education. I wanted to talk about the part with him and Warren when he claimed that he never said a woman couldn't win. Okay, he points out that you can find YouTube videos of him from 30 years ago. You can find videos from the 1980s when he's saying that a woman could be president. He encouraged her to run. So that's a lot of validity to his claim that he wouldn't say that. And instead of CNN asking Elizabeth Warren, like, what's your response to Bernie's statement, they said, How did you feel when he said that? Assuming that he did. CNN, there's points throughout the debate where it seems like they're definitely stacked against Bernie. I understand there was that portion where they asked a lot of candidates hard questions, like Buttigieg's support among African Americans and Tom Steyer. The fact that he's put his own money into his campaign. But it seems like they did an awful lot of promoting Warren while stacking it against Bernie. Thanks for watching.